Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah. It's amazing. Just shifting. Yeah, it's like sometimes you can get way too complex into trying to solve the problem, and actually, I know. Let's reframe it.
Yeah.
Or how about sitting over there?
True.
This is a dull conversation because no one actually saw or heard what we were talking about beforehand.
Oh yeah.
Basically, blonde hair and light backgrounds, and keying is a bit of a challenge.
There's a lot of people ask me, did you dye your hair blonde because now you own a green screen studio?
Yeah, right. You've got a mannequin at your studio, haven't you? Yeah. We used to have one with platinum blonde hair, but actually, I don't know if you've seen, but a red wig is actually the hardest thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, blonde is actually not too bad, but a red hair is a real challenge.
Oh, well, I've seen that. Because we actually had in one of our test shoots, just before we started the studio, we shot this kind of like medical center interview style, corporate interview style type of setup. And we had an actress, really good, very expressive, but she had red curly hair.
Right.
And we're also shooting in log. So there was so much green fringe around the edges, which we didn't solve. We couldn't remove completely.
No, it's a big, it seems to be a problem with that anyway. So on with the podcast. Yes. Everyone's sort of looking at us going, what are these two talking about? Welcome. I'm going to completely get your name wrong. Boren, no. Flora, why is my brain gone completely it's gone completely...
I'll give you another guess and then you're eliminated.
I know it's Florin.
Yeah, so technically Florin is my first name.
Oh, okay.
But my family name is Biro, but I just got used to everyone calling me Biro. So I introduced myself as Biro all the time. Right. So it's Biro for everyone, basically.
Right. So it's Florin Biro, but actually your name was Biro Florin.
Yeah.
I quite like that.
I said that eventually in the future I might change it to have Biro my first name.
Yeah, right. I think so. I got my second name's Chandler, which is obviously quite famous for a first name.
Yes.
As well, right?
Yeah.
But welcome. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You drove all the way up from Notting Hill to...
I'm glad that we managed to do this in person rather than doing it over a call.
Right.
Especially now that I travel to London quite a lot more often. But I think even if you would have said, hey, I'm shooting this in my studio, do you want to come up to London? Probably. It's Brighton. I live in Brighton. Brighton is very close.
It's not too bad. Right. It's not too bad. Introduce yourself. Tell everyone tell me who you are.
It's a complicated story. I come from tech world.
Right.
I used to be a software engineer. Before that, I used to be a serial entrepreneur. I call myself a serial failed entrepreneur because I started so many businesses and none of them stuck. I started my first business when I was 17 years old.
Right.
Kept on trying at it. Eventually got a job in basically fintech in London.
Right.
As a software engineer. Spent around 5 years there. That's where I found my co-founder. We started a software business, SaaS business, in 2018. It started picking up in 2020, and we sold it at the end of 2022.
Right. So 4 years you were in it.
Yeah, but I was doing a lot of content as well. So I started hiring people to do the coding, the product stuff, and I started moving in 2 types of roles, basically, as a co-founder. One, the boring stuff, which was admin, logistics, finances, legal, all of this stuff. And then the other thing was to balance so that I'm a bit better. I don't get bored, which was brand building.
Oh, nice.
Through content.
Right.
So we started doing a lot of content in the industry that we were. That got us quite a bit of popularity. Helped our brand quite a lot, and fundamentally that also helped with the acquisition because we met quite a lot of people in the industry because they knew me from being in front of the
Right.
camera, from doing a variety of content.
Right.
And I've always, when I was a kid, I wanted to get into filmmaking, was writing scripts as well, and I wanted to go to the cinematography university back in my country.
Right.
That never materialized, but that desire for filmmaking still remained. And as I started creating content for my own business, I started getting into film equipment. Oh, maybe I should get a new DSLR and not film with my webcam. Maybe I should get a light. And that snowballed into me being extremely obsessed about film tech.
Right. Got you.
So after I sold the business, I was thinking, what should I do? Investing in other businesses is great. Having a podcast about entrepreneurship and so on, my podcast was also amazing. But I'm an entrepreneur at heart, so I wanted to continue to do that.
Got you.
So I decided to mix the things that I know and love. One was content creation and brand building through content creation.
Right.
And the second being my love and passion for filmmaking.
Filmmaking as well. That's quite interesting. So, so how did you start to decide? How did you get your? I guess. How did you build your YouTube channel? Was it literally just a case of seeing other people do it, or did you sort of make it up as you went along?
Well, which one? Because I had a couple of YouTube channels, and I think what the catalyst for me start creating content for my previous business, my software business, was me actually starting a YouTube channel for a passion of mine, which was sim racing. I started sim racing over the pandemic, and I started setting up things, buying things, and that whole industry was just booming over the pandemic because everyone was locked inside. What should I do? I'll just buy a wheel and pretend I'm driving a car. So, and that kind of took off as well because I was talking about a lot of things. I would think, well, what if I put this and this together?
Right.
And being a new industry, as you probably discovered, and I'm discovering right now with green screen virtual production, it's quite new in the film and commercial space. And there's a lot of innovation happening, but you also feel like you're at the forefront at the beginning of something. So you're putting A and B together, and all of a sudden you have something new that's helping you, but it probably also will help a lot of other people. So it was this exact same thing back then with sim racing. So I've gotten quite a lot of viewership and also a lot of comments, and that kind of fueled a bit of a passion in me for content creation because I was realizing that I can actually help people through talking about the things that I know.
Yeah. Do you find that it's just a case of doing it, or is it a case of, I don't know, the type of content you put out to be successful, or is it just about timing or the personality as well? You know, what makes a successful content creator? Coming from a world, right, of a middle-aged guy who this didn't exist, right, back in that day, and I'm enjoying my journey of sort of finding podcasting as well, and then now video podcasting as well. So I'm intrigued actually, sort of those steps. Did you do it because you just felt passionate about it and you wanted to share it, or was it like an opportunity to build the brand for the business and you thought, this is a marketing tool, so this is how I'm going to do that?
Yeah, well, I had the aha moment when I was doing my passion YouTube channel,
right?
And I was seeing how much of interest and gratitude I was getting for some of the topics that I was talking about and some of the experiments that I was doing and some of the things that I was putting together. And I realized that I really love that feeling, that warm, fuzzy feeling inside when someone writes to you and says, man, your video really helped me figure out this, or that's one. And then the second one is, well, you can actually build a strong community around a certain topic,
right?
if you're passionate enough for it. And also, it's all of the above that you mentioned, right? It's also having a certain type of character that sticks with the audience that you're engaging with, as well as the timing. Because if you're in a place where, like, for example, there's a lot of content being created on super mainstream film equipment,
right?
Your consumer and prosumer type of stuff. It's a very crowded place when it comes to content creators. So even if you have a great personality, there's a sea of content out there. So it's a lot harder for people to see you and engage with you. For example, we've made a series about how we set up our virtual production studio, and talking about the reason why we use red cameras and the Premista lenses and so on, is one of the worst performing videos, because it's about the red camera, which there have been so many videos made about the red V-Raptor camera out there. So it's harder for that type of content to be recommended with ease. So I think it's a lot of them, but the reason why I started for my passion project creating content was because of passion for that topic, and because I was putting A and B together, and I wanted to share it with the world, because that might be helpful for others. And then for my own business, it was a mix of both. I realized that there's value that you get as an individual in educating and sharing information with others, that is, at least to me, as valuable, or in certain situations and scenarios, way more valuable than the profit that you're making out of that business.
It's that sort of. It's a really interesting one, a great success story as well. The fact that you're one of the probably not that many individuals who have created content, and it has really helped with the equity build in their business as well, right? So as you said, it's like one of those things. Is like the visibility of your entire business is grown because of the fact that you've been creating content for it as well.
Yeah, we had a weekly news roundup from the world, the ecosystem, the market that we were in, that we were publishing every single week at the exact same time. We'd publish that episode, and it'd be like a 10-15 minutes long video of news and updates. And that picked up quite well, and a lot of people that were working in that industry were watching that religiously every single week, because they would stay up to date with what's happening in the world that they were working in. And we've got a lot of opportunities from that. We would go to summits and events in the industry, and you wouldn't feel alone, because everyone would know you, and there would be a lot of people coming over and saying hi and talking to myself and so on. So there's definitely benefits as well, but in terms of content creation per se, and having that, I've kind of kept that close to what I do throughout. That's why I started the Misfit Founders podcast, which was an entrepreneurship related podcast, because I wanted to give back. Yes, I built and sold successfully a business. I want to give back, and I want to have other founders give back as well. And now with Masterwork Films and the studio, I made it as important for the mission of what we do to share and to educate, as to offering services in the studio.
I mean, it is really important, actually. It's an interesting thing, I think, with the industry that we both ended up being in, which is one of the interesting things I'd want to talk to you about as well. You know, from not being in it at all, and then suddenly, you know, deciding, oh, this looks fun, let's go and do it. And actually, it's not a very self promoting business. People don't tend to promote themselves. You've got these influencers who do stuff in a certain way, but it doesn't seem to be everyone who's promoting themselves. There doesn't, the people who are sort of the DOPs or certainly the VP side of the world. I guess whether or not that's because they're quite introverted, because they're quite technical, maybe. I don't know.
Potentially. The one thing that I've talked about this in the content that I'm making as well is it's a lot of this information, because it's such a new industry, the whole virtual production world. There's not that much information out there, like freely available. Right. Finding information about X, Y, Z. The way if you get into filmmaking and you're at the beginning of the road and you're a solo shooter, and you have some projects and you want to learn how to do X, Y, Z, you probably find a lot of information how to do that. But in virtual production, is still, and I think because it's coming from this angle of, well, virtual production means large studios, tens of people on set, various tech involved. That is maybe this is an assumption, but maybe is harder to distill down into specific educational pieces.
Yeah, I reckon. Absolutely. I mean, it's just really hard. It's one of the other things, right? It's a technically challenging thing to do with this term that's called virtual production that just seems to, covers so many things. But there's like if as a term, people who have heard it think of it through a certain lens that they know about, right? So they'll think about it and then...
Oh, tell me about it. It's so difficult. So what we do in the studio is green screen virtual production. So basically compositing, real-time compositing, a foreground, a talent, for example, on a stage with a virtual environment, be it that of a 3D virtual environment or a 2D slate, right? Yeah. But the word, it seems like the word virtual production belongs to large stage LED volume type of setups.
Right.
Because when you say that word, everyone thinks about that.
Yeah.
And also people tend to think, at least from all of the discussions that I had with producers and filmmakers that came into my studios that aren't so accommodated to virtual production, tend to think that you must have a very specific type of project in order to use virtual production. Where in reality, well, maybe if you plan to hire, 30,000-50,000 pounds a day volume, yes, you do have to have a very, very good reason to use virtual production. But nowadays, even with smaller LED studios or green screen, you can basically shoot anything in there. And you can also have situations where in the edit, you want to reshoot or redo certain things. You took background slates of some of the shots that you took, and then you just can jump in one of the studios like ours and reshoot certain things.
Yeah, totally.
So there's a lot of use cases, but again, it seems like there's this predefined thinking from people outside the virtual production world, generic filmmaking, I'll give you a call when I have a virtual production project. Yeah. I'm like, well, that defeats the purpose.
Yeah, it's one of those. It feels like it does feel like it's changing. I'd say that. I reckon that's the thing. I think it's starting to settle down into actually people are getting that it's a bit more complex than an incredibly large TV screen, which is sort of how people visualize it because they've seen pictures of it or they've seen pictures of The Mandalorian. And then they and it's also where people decide in their production process to think about the use of virtual production. And is that quite late on in the production process? It's like, oh, we're going to do this and that might work, and let's work down. And they're down to booking locations. Should we book it in a sound stage? Oh, should we phone some virtual production stages up and see sort of how much it's going to cost? Whereas actually, in the creative process, even at the writing stage, you could sort of go, okay, well, I know we can film this particular scene because we can do it either using green screen VP, traditional VFX, or an LED volume as well. But that's a complex thing to understand.
Yeah, well. And that's what I'm seeing with a large portion of filmmakers that come into my studio and look around and see and understand what's possible and what you can use this type of technology for. And they leave with that type of attitude of, oh, I have a bit more free thinking type of approach now, because when I'm doing a commercial project for this customer, when I pitch them something, I don't need to be very modest about my creative idea, because I have this space that I could potentially use for that.
And I think for advertising, it's definitely, I mean, that's the creative, I guess, possibilities that you can do with advertising. Definitely leans into it as well. So so you went from selling your business, we'll dial it back a bit. You went from selling your business, and then it was like, were you sitting around on a desert island and wondering what to do next? How did you then go from sort of, you've been doing, social content for your business and doing it for your entrepreneur stuff. And then how did you find virtual production? I mean, I found it just by absolute chance, but it is incredibly niche. What was that? How did that happen?
Well, first off, I didn't feel comfortable. Like as I mentioned, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 17 years old.
Right.
I'm 38 in a couple of weeks. I've had maybe 6 months of taking it easy after I sold my business.
Right.
Basically just doing investments and running my podcast and nothing else. And I was just not comfortable.
Right.
So I really wanted to start something and get my hands dirty, in a sense, like be an entrepreneur again. And again, because I was doing all of this content stuff and I wanted to continue to do it and help others as well, and because of the filmmaking interest, by that point, I also accumulated quite a bit of equipment that I was using in my business, but it was basically my own. So I wanted to also justify the purchases and also continue to justify purchasing more equipment.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, let me start a film production company, and it wasn't a virtual production business from the beginning. So I started at the beginning of 2024.
So last year?
Yeah, last year. And the aim of the business was to create projects like master classes that are more, have a bit more of a storytelling aspect to it.
Right.
And the storytelling part was quite critical in our identity as a film production company. We were working back then, and we're still working with a award-winning documentary filmmaker. So we wanted most of our projects, be it commercials, let's say brand videos, like brand culture videos, or master classes, to feel like documentaries or something where you're kind of following an action and you're consuming that content because you're invested in the story.
Got you. Yeah. Smart.
And we shot a couple of things over 2024. Then I wanted to do basically a spec commercial. And I wind up spending way too much money in that spec commercial, because I decided to build an entire set for it.
Got you.
So we built this cabin, old cabin in the woods type of setup, 3 meters by 3 meters, and then we had a lot of people on set. We had set decorators. We had a lot of stuff happening.
Right.
And I realized, well, this is great, but I'm probably going to have customers that don't want to invest half of their budget in building a set for their commercial or for whatever content they're making. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to start the studio and to get into virtual production. But initially, it wasn't even supposed to be a virtual production studio.
Right.
I had a lot of equipment, and I started a rental business as well for my equipment.
Got you.
And I needed a space to hire out my equipment.
Right.
And that also became, if I have a space to hire out my equipment, I have an office here as well. Well, if I have an office, maybe I can have a white cyc, a corner with a white cyc to do some of the talking head bits for our projects. And then it was like, maybe we can blast some green lights and do a tiny bit of virtual production, because I was curious about that as well, replacing backgrounds and so on. Not necessarily virtual production, but replacing backgrounds. And then as I got into that, I started researching if blasting RGB green light over a cove would be a bright idea or not.
Right.
Pun intended. And I got into it, and I realized, you're going to get a lot of spill. You're going to do that. I started looking at painted coves, and that kind of escalated into starting to find real-time keying, virtual production on green screens. And I've talked about this, and I'm very public about this. Like the aha moment for me was seeing some of the results that Social EU was getting.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of the industry, when it comes to green screen virtual production, knows who they are, because they were getting quite amazing results, and a bit not that, let's say, super broadcasty, high key setup that you see usually in broadcast scenarios in TV, but actually a bit more filmic, a bit more shadows, and looking a bit more, I won't call it cinematic, but crispier and moodier than actual, everything is bright and that's it.
Yeah.
So that kind of, at that point I had that aha moment, and I thought, maybe I don't need to have a studio that has one corner there's a white cyc. I have some flats that I can use, and then maybe a bit of a green screen section, and just go full investment in green screen virtual production, because it means I can do all kinds of projects in here.
Yeah.
So that's how I got to it.
So you went, so how did you, you'd gone through Social EU, which they do film some amazing things actually. And I think they do live keying as well, right? Time as well. They do an incredibly good job as well.
Yeah, they have Blackmagic Ultimates. They have a lot of them. So that's how they do the live keying.
Yeah, so they're pretty good. And what to say, your studio's where? It's down in Brighton,
yeah,
in the UK, right?
Yeah.
And you've got all this stuff there, and all of this kit, and you built this stuff. And where did you? What was your first challenge? What was when you turned it all on? What was the first nightmare where you went, did I do the right thing?
Well, you know what?
It looks so easy when socially.
This is what annoys me, because when I've done the first test, everything was perfect.
Okay.
So, but it wasn't without. I spent 2 months. I'm also the type of person that obsesses about a topic. Right. So when I get into a topic, I obsess about it. I for 2 months straight, when I realized that this could be a possibility for me to get really realistic shots with green screen virtual production, I spent the next 2 months, maybe at least 4 hours per day, just looking at everything that's out there in terms of hardware, software, techniques, everything. And again, it's not like a very extensive list of resources, but I was as down in the trenches as the threads on forums and so on, and reading about things. So I had 2 months of understanding what a stack of, let's say, VP servers would look like, what's the workflow that I'm looking for, and a bunch of other things. So by the time I was ready to invest in all the tech and also the studio, I kind of knew what I wanted to do.
Got you.
So we've built the green screen cove, and then I built the whole my server stack rack, which has 3 automats, has a 3 hyperdecks, and the switcher and a bunch of other things like a monitor. And I turned it on, and everything turned on properly, and everything worked
brilliantly.
Yeah, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, really, is that easy? I guess there's a benefit of using, let's call it a unified ecosystem like Blackmagic, for example, where you can get all of their products, and then you connect them together, and it just works.
And it should work. And also they and it is broadcast, quality.
Yeah.
Tech kit as well that we're using. It's like it is designed to be on 24/7.
Yeah.
And not fail.
So I was surprised, and as soon as I saw the picture, I had the mannequin that you were talking about.
Oh yeah.
And I pulled, and even in those 2 months, it wasn't just learning about virtual production and the hardware and the software. It was also learning Unreal Engine.
Right.
I'm not an Unreal Engine. I had never touched Unreal Engine before the end of last year.
Right.
So I had to learn how to set up a cinema camera, learn what I need to do in order to pull like a 4K signal out of that cinema camera outside the computer and into the automat and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But again, once I set it up, it just worked, and I was getting a really good key.
Yeah.
Where the hairs were all, you could see all the hairs and so on.
Yeah.
It was only after that I started slowly experiencing more and more issues that I had to overcome.
Right.
And I think the first one was with the tracking system. That was probably the first
camera tracking.
Yeah, the first challenge that I faced was the camera tracking, because I went for anti-latency because it was a cheaper tracking system, but one that's a lot that's quite accurate, and also it doesn't need recalibrating, and it's just you turn on the lights and it works. And the camera is exactly where it's supposed to be. You don't have to recalibrate anything. But because you don't need to recalibrate, it means that it has fixed markers. Moses, Stipe, they have fixed infrared markers. This has two, but the one difference is that I don't know if you've ever seen anti-latency.
Actually, it's one of the only ones I've not actually dabbled with.
So, but have you seen any of it?
No, I don't think I have.
It has like this tiny camera, this puck of a camera.
Yeah.
And actually, the camera is this big, and it's 200 degrees, and it has a USB-C to this small camera module. It's tiny. So you can plug that USB straight into your computer if you want to.
Right.
But it also comes with this housing, which makes it a tiny bit bigger. But still, it weighs nothing.
Right.
And you can have the signal also wirelessly transmitted to your computer. So you can have a receiver at the computer and so on.
Right.
The challenge is that they don't have a markers calibration system the way Moses has, which you stick those dots anywhere and then you just go with the camera around and calibrate it.
Yeah, it just sees it.
It sees it and so on. No, you have to have a very specific pattern with those infrared markers.
Right.
So they have these ceiling tiles, like in offices. What are they called? The
ceiling tiles.
Yeah, the ceiling tiles where there's cutouts. And you have the infrared, because these infrared markers are not like shiny stickers.
Yeah.
It's actually a laser
Okay.
So they have these lasers, and you see a green light from that.
From the tiles.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So those infrared markers are actual green lasers or something like that, lights.
Right.
And then the camera sees those green lights and knows where it is in space.
Right.
At least that's what I'm assuming it works. But because they don't have that set up calibration system, you have to install them in a certain pattern on your ceiling.
Got you.
And then you have to tell in the software, well, I've installed 50 of these panels and I've installed them in this direction.
Okay.
And that's your calibration, which makes it really easy. But it also means that if you have a bespoke ceiling set up, it becomes very difficult to do it, because they have those fake ceiling basically tiles. Then they have a flooring version where you put tiles on the flooring.
Right.
And then they have truss bars. So light trusses. You've seen light trusses in studios and so on. So they have a kit with 4 bars that install on various size trusses, but they're always installed at the same. There's 4.
Got you. So it's quite uniform.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of thing. Have to be
and you have to install them in the middle of the trusses, and then specify how big is your truss.
Got you.
In terms of dimension.
Got you.
And we had a light grid installed. So we put a light grid with aluminum pipes.
Right.
With like 6 in each direction.
Yeah.
And that was our ceiling. So I bought the light trusses because anti-latency assured me that we would be able to do something with that. And they actually created a custom profile for us where they said, and I don't know if they've ever done that before with someone else. And we bought them, we installed them. They said, well, install it however you want. Just make sure that they're all at the same height from the floor, and try to install them. There's 4 bars. Try to install them as uniform as basically not everything in one corner. So spread them across your ceiling. Yeah. So we've done that. But in order for them to code a custom profile that says, oh, this is how the infrared trackers look, we had to measure from each bar had 3 infrared trackers. We had to measure from each end of those bars to the next one, and then to the one across, and then to the one.
Okay. So it's like it has to be super accurate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So that was the first challenge, but luckily the anti-latency support team was super on point, and we were on calls with them. If I would message them, hey, I can't figure this out, I'm not exaggerating, 10 minutes later I'll be on a call with them.
Hey, that's pretty good.
So that was the first challenge, and it took a few hours for us to see that virtual camera moving and get that
joyful,
that excitement. Oh, well, the camera's moving, the actual camera's moving, and the virtual camera's moving. We're getting somewhere. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, that can be pretty exciting. That's for sure. All right, so that was one of your biggest problems as well, right? So that was trying to get that.
Not really. That was the first problem, but I would say that was our smallest of concerns.
Right.
I think my biggest pain so far has been getting an even green.
Right.
Or let's say the ultimately seeing an even,
like a flat
green in the background. That has been the biggest pain, and I think it's because of multiple reasons. One, we don't have the biggest of space,
right?
So we have a 6.5 meters wide and 3.5 meters depth on our studio,
right?
The walls are not fully perfectly built as well. We didn't go for any kits or anything like that. We just had builders build the psych. And there were a couple of things that I realized. One, we made a 45 centimeters radius for the
cove.
for the cove.
Yeah.
So the smallest radius that we could do.
Right.
And that's causing a bit of issues because light accumulates in those corners.
Yeah.
When you have bigger radiuses, it just falls off. But when you have smaller radiuses, it becomes a light source.
Yeah.
It just
by itself.
bounces.
It just bounces around.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
And then it's also because it's a smaller stage, and because we didn't want it to go with stage lamps, right? Like lanterns or whatnot, and evenly light everything. And we wanted to completely separate the talent from any green screen lights. It meant that we had limited distance that we could use in order to light up the green screen and still have operating area on the stage.
Yeah.
So I think the lights should have been further away from the green,
right?
And also more powerful because there's like 100 watts. But again, you can clearly see that when you dim the light because of the position and because of when you dim the light not to get a hotspot, you're losing quite a lot of light.
Yeah, the gradient, it starts to grade, right?
Yeah, it starts to darken towards the edge, and that's primarily because of the position.
Yeah.
So if we would have more space, then it would be a lot even and angled properly.
Yeah.
But as we would go backwards, that there wouldn't be powerful enough to light at the brightness that we would want to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent a lot of time working that, and you're absolutely right about that. Was I think on trying to research that bit is still like there is nothing really. I saw a video once about how far you need to be away from the green screen from a camera's perspective, as in there's a sort of an equation that you need to be X amount of distance away. Then we had, I think we always had a straight, like vertical panel, and a couple of, did we have wings? We didn't actually have wings. We just did it in straight. And the thing that occurred to me when I used to visit other people's ones is they have this three-sided box. And I always was sort of, we went to one called Camberwell and we shot in there. And it was, and I sort of, when I was looking at it, it was like all of this green light is coming in from the side. Yeah. It's like there's this huge amount of spill, and everyone was sort of talking about it. It's like, well, okay, well then that seems a bit mad. But it was like, trying to do research on somebody that actually worked out how to do real-time compositing, who was willing to share it, because most people who were doing it at a really high level with people like the BBC, big broadcasters who had these massive studios and had lanterns to be able to light it with as well. And had also a lot of people paid, quite good money to be able to finesse it as well. And it was, really, really difficult to understand, color temperature, what temperature the light needs to be. Because as soon as you start going warm, it like starts to make this muddy thing. But it also had a benefit we found. And also, actually, you've probably found it as well, once you've got a green floor in and you're trying to light talent and that light is warm, then that is hitting the green floor, which is slightly sort of almost making an ochre colour. It sort of makes this weird sort of, which the Ultimatte can sort of deal with, but if it's then you're trying to do the wall as well at the same time, right? So I think as you know, you've seen this wall here that we've got, which we ended up leaning it back to get the ability to be able to get as flat a green as possible, because it's a tangent to those sort of spotlights as well. But one thing I did work out is, I don't know if you've tested it, turning the lights there, because we DMX'd them. Right, so we were able to sort of literally just incrementally turn them down, and we'd have a waveform monitor as well, looking at it to try and get, because you'd sort of typically see a sort of a bow in there as the camera was starting to see the edges of the green, and then we'd play around with the DMX to get that as flat as possible, kind of thing, and also quite low. as well. That was sort of the other understand, trying to get that in order to be able to finesse it. But you can get the light really low sometimes as well, in order and still get quite a good key.
Yeah, I really don't know how the automat works, because sometimes I would put the light of the cove at like uniform 50-60% and hit file clear on the automat, and it would leave some hotspots, but you're starting from that as the base, and then you put all the lights at say 10% or 20%
Yeah.
instead of 50 or 60, and you do file clear, and it still gives you the same hotspot.
Yeah, because so I contacted, and I can't remember his name, but it'll come to me, the guy who invented the Ultimate. I'll share his details. He's a really good guy. So he works at Blackmagic now, because I think he sold it. And he also used to go to all of the trade fairs as well. So I'd talk to him. Unger is his surname.
I think I might have met him at NAB.
You probably
Yeah,
did.
I talked to him. Yeah,
Really, really nice guy. Anyway, so we were talking about it, and and he explained it to me, and it sort of went over my head. But he said it's actually color differentiation that it uses. It doesn't necessarily it sees green, but it tries to differentiate between the spectrums or something like that,
right,
as well. So changing it and then pulling the reset, it will see the same thing. It doesn't see it. But what you can do, that I found, is that you don't reset it, because as you say, it will just sort of reset to where it thinks it is anyway. But you can play around with the lighting after you've pulled the key.
I've seen that. That's one of my hacks nowadays.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a hack. It literally is. You sort of get it to the place that looks good, and then actually start to adjust the lighting. And then, when you go to the what's the setting of the Ultimate? It's not the combined. It's the other one.
The
matte. Is the combined matte, or is it anyway?
It's the combined matte, and then is the foreground matte.
Yeah, maybe that one. Anyway, one of the ones that, and then you can sort of visually see it, trying to get that as white as possible without anything. And then there's I don't know if you've also noticed, which is just joyful, is that when you do pull a key and then you initially do it and it sort of blinks and then looks a bit rubbish, and then it thinks about it for about 5 seconds and then sort of pops in.
Yeah, and adjusts it.
It's a beautiful thing.
Holding. But it's also nerve-wracking, because you're like you're pressing the file clear, and it just for a second it does something, and then it clears it, and you're like, oh yes, it worked. It doesn't look like rubbish.
Right.
Yeah. But I think, honestly, where I see this tech going is in more spatial awareness.
Right.
Direction.
What do you mean by that? Yeah.
And there's a couple of software-based skiers that started doing, basically understanding your green screen 3D space.
Got you. Yes, I understand.
And knowing, oh well, but hold on, because that green is from the background, is from the green screen. So even if it's a bit of a different type, different intensity, or it's not super flat, I'll still remove that tint of green as well, because that's not foreground. That's still part of the background. Yeah. And one thing that I would love to see is basically LiDAR-based green screen keying.
Yeah, well, they so Lightcraft. Do Lightcraft do it? So you can do it on the phone. There's Lightcraft, and then there's Viola, VOIA. I think they were on the podcast recently. As was Lightcraft. So they're looking at doing that kind of thing, but it only works using the iPhone. I think they're probably going to flame me now in the comments. But yeah, I've always thought that, actually, and I always thought actually there's got to be someone who's going to do that 3D thing where actually it doesn't need to be rubbish, but at least it can do something about those hotspots.
Yeah.
What I've also thought about is whether or not you could actually have some sort of clever, whizzy DMX controlled thing that actually will adjust. It will look at the green screen, and then it'll look at it and go, okay, well, I need to turn that light down slightly, this light up slightly, and it'll do it, and it will get it flat by itself.
Yeah, true. But the thing is that it really depends on, because on a setup like mine is almost impossible to get that, because one, my cove is not perfect.
Right.
So, and I mentioned this in the video that I've made about how we light this whole setup. My corners, when they've put the stage, it was piece by piece.
Right.
They assemble it, and then they realized they measured it, but there's one to measure, one to fit it into a space.
Right.
Because we didn't build, for example, something like what others might do, which is make it smaller and leave some space on site so you can move the cove the way it needs to be, perfectly 90 degrees.
Right.
We actually built it to measure. And this is something that I've learned that probably on the next studio I will avoid doing and leave some buffer, because we built it so that it's on the wall, on the actual wall. So the stage structure is stuck to the actual wall. And one thing that we realized was that the measurements were a bit off, where the walls, especially that I'm in an old ex-elementary school, which is now a business center. The walls, none of the walls are straight. So what happened was, when they were putting in the stage and started assembling piece by piece, they realized that it doesn't fit in one corner because the corner was closed off.
Right.
It was actually not even the one corner; it was both corners. They were not perfect 90 degrees. So they had to jam it into the corner, and then my corners became less than 90 degrees as well.
So acute.
Yeah, and so the curvature. Basically, what happened was it wasn't a perfect curvature anymore,
right?
Because that curvature that they designed and cut was based on a perfectly straight 90 degrees angle.
Right.
So what that meant was that you can definitely see the difference between the straight wall and the curve,
right?
Where you can see where the curve starts rather than starting very lean.
So that's the. You're talking about the vertical cove.
Yeah, the vertical
cove. And is that vertical curve or cove? Because you talked about the one at the bottom was only, what was it, 30 centimeters?
45 centimeters.
So 40, and is that the same with the vertical ones as well? Right, got you.
So there's a clear, and especially because it's a smaller curvature and it accumulates the light.
Right.
You can clearly see the difference between the straight wall and then going into a very harsh line into that corner.
Yeah.
And then apart from that, not being able to put the lights too far away, not wanting to do a lantern type of setup, and where it's a bit more patchy. I think it takes a lot of energy, a lot of time and money to build a studio that is perfect. Where you turn on the lights and the green is completely flat.
I think it's almost impossible based on assumptions of how it's always been done. I was talking to someone about this the other day, actually, and I think it goes with the conversation we had. There's hardly any online about there is no science online about this at all. Like find anyone who can tell you what color that green is and if it is scientifically proven to work with the Ultimat.
Yeah.
There isn't, because there is no color. I asked a paint manufacturer the other day to say, well, what's the standards for that? There is no standard for the green. Yeah. Now, there is a standard in as much as the manufacturers who make the green paint make it very uniform. So from batch to batch, it's going to be pretty similar. Although I bet you if you put it over next to each other, batch to batch, it probably looks slightly different. And it's the same. None of them, there's no ISO standard for that particular green. So that's in itself a challenge. So let alone going, well, the standard cove diameter has to be no more or no less than X, right?
Yeah.
But so there's all of these assumptions about vertical lines and the sort of coving and all that kind of stuff, because that's how it's always been done. Because when you go into VFX, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and the idea is it's everything. I've been told that it doesn't matter what kind of sensor you use with the Ultimate,
right?
As long as you have sharp lenses. In the reality, that's not true.
Right.
I mean, I had a hunch about this because I'm running in my studio Red V Raptor with Vista Vision, which is like two stitched together sensors. It's a really big sensor.
Right.
And
so that's the camera sensor.
Yeah.
Right. Got you.
Vista Vision, which is larger than full frame.
Oh, okay.
So full frame is full frame, and then Vista Vision is even bigger. Yeah. And there are multiple reasons why I got that. One, for me, seeing Vista Vision compared to a Super 35 or Micro Four Thirds, it just feels like you have so much more information in the picture. But the most important bit is I have a small studio. It means that I can get quite wide in a limited depth of my studio where I have the camera, because I have a Vista Vision and a 19 millimeters, which is the widest I can go with one of my Premista lenses. It's a 19 millimeter lens that covers Vista Vision. Right. So basically, you can see a lot more of the space.
Got you.
But it turns out I had a hunch about this because I was watching Socially You and other people that made tutorials and videos about lighting up the green screen and then turning on your Ultimate and keying and how auto magic everything was.
Right.
And I wasn't getting that.
Yeah.
And I would always see these contrasts and differences in where you would see not just hotspots, but you'd also see the areas that are a bit darker.
Right.
You know, when you switch between program and background, and there's such a big difference between the colors and the brightness of the background and the actual program. And I was so frustrated about it. So I had a hunch, it must be my sensor. But people tell me that sensor doesn't matter. And then it was pretty much thanks to, and I'm so glad that Andre was inspired to change his cameras to Pixis, and Pixis are full frame.
Right.
So he went from Micro Four Thirds to Super 35 to now being full frame.
Right.
And I think there've been a bit more of challenge of keying with the full frame.
Right.
And he mentioned in one of his, I don't know if you've seen, he has these debrief sessions. So he has a YouTube channel, and he's doing these debriefs once he shoots with the customer, and they talk about the challenges that they have and so on.
Good, yeah.
And he raised this. I think the larger sensors are struggling more. I mean, the Ultimate struggles more with larger sensors, and we had a conversation about it as well. And I've actually bought a couple of Blackmagic Studio 6K, which are Super 35.
Right.
And I was showing you before we started this. It's a huge difference.
Big difference.
Yeah, and it makes sense because you have so much more spectrum on that big sensor of capturing so much more nuances versus on the smaller one, which you probably have less information. So the Ultimate, and again, these are assumptions in a sense. Like no one came to me and said this is how technically the Ultimate works.
Yeah, use 35 millimeter or micro 2/3. Right. One of the things I found, because I banged my head against the wall for a long time. And then I can't remember if it was the guy from Blackmagic said, or someone else, or I read it in a manual. He said, "Oh no, Rec 709 or Rec 2020 is the only thing that really the Ultimate is happy with. Try anything else, and it's like we'll struggle." And that sort of tells you something about sort of how it's been designed, because of the color space that's going to go into it. You know, it's doing a really tough job. Let alone, and I worked out, it's like you have to give it what it's expecting. If you try and overcomplicate it, or give it, there's that sort of, I guess that, whether it's technical ego that we like to sort of, think by giving it more, it's gonna be easier for it, because it's obviously that's the solve, right? It's like you give it more, bigger sensor, an 8K sensor, 12, and actually it's a hell of a lot harder.
And it's with everything. Another thing that I've discovered was I think the automat runs in very specific parameters. It runs optimal in very specific parameters, but we don't know what those parameters are.
Right.
I'll give you another example. I've changed so in the red, you can change your contrast. Right, to have in the picture profile to basically say whether it is high contrast, medium, or low contrast. And then you can also change the highlights fall off to have like softer highlights, more cinematic, up to crispier highlights.
Yeah.
And I changed those settings because at one point, at the beginning, I mentioned I turned everything on and everything was working properly.
Yeah.
But it was because of two reasons. Like I had the regular picture profile. I wasn't using wide log or anything like that in the red. I had very crispy shadows and brightness contrast wise, and then also I had the house lights because it was before I set up the studio lights.
Right.
So I had the house lights that were making super even on the stage. So it basically keyed like that.
Right.
And then setting up the lights, which we talked about, and then I decided, well, I wanted to look a bit more filmic, a bit more cinematic.
Yeah.
So I changed the contrast and the highlights roll off to the lowest, so that it's a lot smoother, creamier, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it at the time. But from then onwards, slowly I started struggling more and more with keying, where I was getting a lot more of the green cast, a lot more of the green fringing on the hair and edges and things like that. And I was thinking to myself, it worked at the beginning. What the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And it took me a while to realize that, a while as in a couple of weeks, because I would try to get a good key and it wouldn't work.
Right.
And I would just leave it there and I would try another. And at one point we were doing some tests for a shoot with someone from the film industry from local in Brighton that wanted some experience with this technology. And we had so many issues that I was literally at the end of the day, after the person left, the filmmaker left, I was sat down on my bum looking at the studio and I was thinking, why is it so hard?
I know.
And I was thinking to myself, if I had a customer right now here and I would have all of these technical challenges, because I had some motion challenges, the keying was awful.
Right.
I was thinking that person, that potential customer would have been out the door and I would never see them. And then eventually I stumbled upon those highlight roll-off settings. And I'm like, but hold on a second, like this is low. Could it be related to that? And I just changed the highlight roll-off to be harsh and then high contrast.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it was keying a lot better.
Right.
So there are parameters, we just don't know which ones there. And that's why I'm saying that having a keyer that's spatially aware would be a lot better of an idea than just relying on the green variation.
Absolutely, totally agree. I mean, I must admit, I banged my head and had those experiences, same with you, where sometimes a DOP would come in and just tweak something and then walk off, and then suddenly nothing's working.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I remember there's a setting on the Ursa Mini as well, which was, it was something to do with refinement or something like that someone had changed. And then of course what we used to do is have 3 cameras as well. I don't know if you've done multi-camera yet.
Yeah.
But try and do 3 cameras and then trying to duplicate the settings on absolutely every single one, of which of course, and they're in different positions. So then they're seeing a completely different key. Yeah. And if you've not set everything right, you're looking at this thing going, why? Because this one work and the other 2 are fine. Or one of those 2 is not working. Absolutely, yeah. Which is why simplicity is so much easier.
Yeah.
Right? It's like it is tough, but we're also asking it to do a lot, right? I mean, it was designed a long time ago, but mainly it's been used for weather forecasting, and most recently it's sort of picked up a lot more because of the pandemic, and obviously the BBC used it for the Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics, and then most sports studios are now done in green screen, but they're in a highly controlled environment where it's not filmatic. All it is they're doing broadcast 60 frames a minute. That's what they do, highlighting. They've worked out that kind of stuff. They're just not making cinematic any sort of feel to it. They need it to look like it is.
Yeah, but I think we're at the cusp of virtual production and green screen virtual production in this more narrative and commercial
I agree
world. And I think there are a couple of companies that are doing spatial, not LiDAR, but you set up by walking around with the camera and giving it that 3D environment of your green screen, and that kind of like contributes to.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, for example, I'll give you another example of like optical trackers used to be, from my knowledge, they only had relying on one type of tracking on camera, and now optical trackers have a lot more sensors in them to help keep it stable and not see any deviation or any mismatch in terms of like, for example, the Moses has the optical tracker, which sees the infrared trackers, but also has a gyro inside.
Yes.
So it kind of knows how it moves, not just because detecting of the dots, but also all of the other sensors inside to help it.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally, as this green screen in filmmaking for virtual production, green screen in filmmaking gets more and more popular, I think the technology needs to become and will become a lot more stable, where there's a lot more, I would say, solutions for the challenges that we're currently facing.
Yeah, and as you said, we're not. I think we were talking a bit earlier on about it sort of being at the early stages of it, and it's been around for ages, but it still does feel like it's really, really early on. And there is this technical thing, that you've alluded to, which is you're sort of sitting in your studio wondering what on earth went wrong. There's 100 things, and it was the camera tracking, and the keyer wasn't playing up, and there was a light, and someone had adjusted a camera, and there was this, and there was that. It can't, it really can't be that hard. And if it gets solved, it really does open up a massive door for the creativity. But people, it's so difficult to get your head around. There aren't that many people, really, globally, there really aren't that many people mad enough to try and do it, to be honest with you, because it's like it's financially really challenging to run a business.
Well, if anyone out there wants to build a green screen keyer that uses some sort of LiDAR technology, more than happy to participate.
And maybe we should just do it, right? Maybe
and help fund the R&D stuff as well, because I don't know, it feels it's always great to enter an industry at the very beginning of it. And yes, you're right. Real-time keying and compositing is not new. It's been around for quite a while because of broadcast.
Yeah.
But it stayed in broadcast up until recently.
Right.
And only now we're seeing more narrative, commercial, even YouTube and podcast stuff being done on green screen with virtual production elements in it.
Yeah.
Just the other day, I was talking to someone, a client, to do live streaming.
Right.
And because of all of the tech stack that we have in there and the tech being available, you can do key, composite, color grade, camera switch, live layers and graphics coming in, and stream it in 4K.
Yeah.
Like, what world we live in where with a server like this of let's say Blackmagic or other types of devices, you can take on large broadcast studios.
Right.
So it makes sense to put all of this to good use, and people are doing that, and we'll see more and more of content being created with setups like this, which will push the technology for further. And that's the biggest challenge, because going back to what you said, my studio's biggest challenge is easily keying. Let's not say properly keying, because I can get to a point where it's a decent key, but every single time I have a new project, I have like fingers crossed that it's not that angle, or that the lighting is there, or wrong type of hair, or this and that, and I spend an entire day or half a day just preparing the key for that. And in scenarios where you have static cameras, it's a bit easier. But we also, at the end of the day, a lot of people that come into the studio, although you can use this tech for static type of shots as well, everyone's impressed with having that crane move around with the camera and zooming in and focusing and seeing the virtual environment move around and making it feel as immersive as possible. And when you're moving around a camera on a studio and all of a sudden you catch the corner and that corner is blasting light like crazy, then it becomes very difficult to choreograph, making sure that you have an even green screen for any type of movements. And then you get into, well, probably I need a super large space with a big green screen so I can light it with powerful lights from a distance and still have a lot of enough room
to be able
for
to move the camera. Absolutely. It's a real it's a real challenge. And then and whether or not then you have to then make the decision to go into post-production, which then ends up costing you a fortune because you have to do it that way. Whether or not there's some sort of actually I was talking to someone about a little bit earlier on actually, and not that anyone can see the construction of the green screen we've got behind us, but it's sort of stretched material. And I was wondering whether or not actually if you stretched white somehow and then had some sort of backlight, so you backlit it with either blue or green, and you can then literally turn those on and off. It sort of came to me in a bit of a weird sort of flash. I imagine you can't do it because of the struts and shadows that you'd probably get, but you never know. It's like it's kind of thing. Sometimes you just have to think outside the box, as it were.
Well, I'll tell you that the Ultimate does really well, is very happy with log green.
Right.
Because in log, you can't see that much the differences in variation of color and so on.
So
and because they're not made for log, where it's not taking log and saying, oh, this is log, let me grade it and let me then remove the green screen. They're just made for Rec 79 and the 2020. It would take that green and say, oh, this looks very even, I'll just remove all of it. The problem with log is that it's currently not supported by Ultimate, which means that you're getting a lot more of the fringe. You're getting a lot more of the cast because it doesn't know how to interpret skin tones and such.
I don't know if you've played around with it, but I played around with sending a log signal with a LUT in it, and then played around with a LUT. So it had a Rec 709 LUT applied to the log or Blackmagic RAW.
And then send it into the Ultimate.
Then send it onto the Ultimate.
Interesting.
But then that gives you the flexibility to play around with that LUT as well. So I did do it, and I tried it, and actually the standard Blackmagic LUT, which is from film 4.6 film into Rec 709, is a different image or color than just the video or extended video. And I can't remember if that was, it became, I think, more of a challenge because of that pipeline, and also if you wanted to record on camera, because if you record on a camera, you'd only get the film, which was I think log. So you wouldn't get anyway. Blah blah blah. So it ends up you have to sort of think about really what you're trying to achieve as well.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of people listening or watching this podcast will comment, try asymmetry, try this try this here because it's great. And
we're gonna have to wrap up soon. Keep going.
I think that eventually I'll give some of these keyers, software keyers, a try as well, mainly because I just love the picture quality from my VistaVision red. It looks so amazing. And if I, for example, put it in log and output the Unreal Engines in a camera in red, white gamut, it just looks so beautiful compared to, let's say, traditional profile of a camera. And the thing is also, a lot of people use the Blackmagic ecosystem, including cameras, right, for green screen stuff.
Yeah.
And using the same profile, using the same, and sure, you can tweak certain things in the automat and in post and so on, but it's just having something that looks completely different in terms of color science. To me, is very exciting.
I reckon. It wouldn't surprise me because Blackmagic has not really done anything with the automat other than made it, an HD version that's a lot cheaper. And I wonder whether or not it's not really occurred to them that adding in different profiles could be useful, because it's a broadcast bit of kit, right? So Rec 709 and Rec 2020 is what you would output. Why would you think about taking in anything else?
Well, I can tell you that I've had a lengthy discussion with them at NAB in Vegas, and I think I've opened a bit of a thinking, a bit of a thought around this, because the idea is, if I'm able to use my cinema camera with my cinema lens in a log profile with an automat, and key it properly, you literally just open up an entire new industry with this. Because any big production would want to shoot log. You've probably seen a lot of the green screen stuff that's from Hollywood and so on. They shoot log. They do a lot of stuff that's log.
For sure.
So that opens up every single filmmaker and director and producer that I had in the studio, and I said, we're actually using log for certain things, and we can use log, and we're looking at having that ability and have virtual production, green screen virtual production in log. Just their eyes just light up completely.
Well, especially if they've got to getting something, capturing it in camera versus, or theoretically in camera, is so much more cost effective than having to go into post. We're gonna have to wrap up because we've got 2 minutes. Thank you, mate. We're gonna have to do a second version. Right, at some point as well. What we do need to do is smile and laugh at the cameras, because that means kind of thing. Because that means that I get to do a shot at the beginning, which seems to attract more people. Right. Two beauties like us.
What, the thumbnail?
The thumbnail, it's a lot about it. So thumbnail shot, right? But thank you. Anyway, thanks a lot for coming.
No worries. Thank you. I think I could talk about this for days, and I literally done, and I'm gonna continue to do it on your podcast for part 2, and also on the content that we're creating, because it's such a complex and I wouldn't call it necessarily vast but deep world.
It bridges that sort of thing between it being into a craft rather than a technology sort of solution. You almost need to get a feel and do it enough and be experienced enough to know whether it's a color temperature, whether it's the light, whether it's the intensity, whether it's the substrate, whether it's whether it's the foreground lights and all that kind of stuff.